Thanks, Joe, and welcome to all the people out there on our chat room. We're really glad to see you again. Now, the first section here, it's Christmas. We have stories of Christmas stars. We have Christmas trees with sort of a fake star at the top. We have our rather famous kids' novel cartoon history book on Starboy. Stars play a big part in the traditional Christmas story, and whether it was a star or just an astronomical event, we'll get onto that a bit later. But there is one thing that has really been interesting to me ever since I was a kid. Here in Australia, where I grew up out on the edge of the city, where the sky was clean and I could see the stars, particularly after a big storm. We had a big one last night, and I'm still waiting to see if the area which was smashed really badly, Acacia Ridge, where our museum is. I haven't heard any reports this morning. I can't find anything online, so I'm assuming the museum is okay, but I'll catch up with folks a little later. Now, basically, the stars are beautiful when you're out here in Australia. The first time I drove out west, it became even more glorious. And I've fallen in love with the stars ever since I was a kid. And because I used to run a survival club, I would teach the young people how to find their way in the dark without a compass. This is all in before the days of GPS and phones and Google and all those sort of things. And you really did need to know your way around. It's really rescued me occasionally when I've been sort of lost in the bush. Not my fault. We had a geologist who thought he knew where he was going. And by about 8 p.m., it was very evident he didn't. But there was no moon. There was no lights. We were in the bush, stuck on a mountainside, and the only visible bit was up. Now, it does pay to know which stars will tell you north, which stars will tell you east, which stars will be a star map for you. Now, you can learn a lot of that in basic astronomical courses. You can learn where the Southern Cross directs you to. You can learn about the North Polar Star. But there's another thing that since I became a Christian, which has really fascinated me. And that is when you look at Genesis and it says, God made all the stars and he made them for a purpose. He made them for signs, for seasons. So it shouldn't surprise us that there are signs in the heavens. And of course, since I come from a non-Christian background, my mum particularly would, every day the newspaper came, it had a list of your stars. And I grew up skeptical of that stuff. And I grew up knowing people who wouldn't go anywhere without consulting their local astrologer. In fact, you can go around town now and you can pay money to visit someone who'd say they went to church and yet they'd read the star charts for you. Well, when I became a Christian, I got interested in the fact that the wise men, the magi, were actually astrologers. And it's very interesting that that's the word that's used. Up until a Christian astronomer in the start of the scientific revolution decides to say, well, let's keep track of the current astrologers and their predictions. And I'll tell you what, he discovered you may as well just toss a coin based on the court astrologers, and he was one of those court astrologers. But in all of this, there's a name that popped out from way back at the start of the Reformation, and the name is Bullinger. And so to start tonight off, I've asked Craig if he'd give us a review of what this man who was interested in signs in the stars, because it's very evident the Magi were actual astrologers. It's very evident that God used Daniel way back in the Old Testament to read the minds, to read the dreams, to read the signs. And he used this, and he used star signs. And Bullinger came up with some very interesting stuff. So I've asked Craig, could he spend 5 or 10 minutes just going over the work of one guy who's convinced that when God made the sun and the moon and the stars, he did make them for signs. He did make them for times. He did make them for seasons. And part of that covers the whole message of the gospel from Genesis chapter 1 right up to Revelation 22. Now, Craig, I don't expect you to give us all of Bullinger's books because they're incredibly thick and incredibly well detailed, but give us a look at some of the interesting things you've come across. Over to you, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, John. So, yeah, I don't pretend to be an expert in this field, but I found it very fascinating to get into and study a little bit. So here's the Companion Bible by Bullinger, and in the appendix of that one, which is I've largely built my little summary here around. He's got some incredible details there. Just while I'm showing resources as well, there's a really good summary in Dennis Peterson's book, Unlocking the Mysteries of Creation. So that's got a good summary of the gospel basically in the stars. So if you want to just get my slides up, thanks, Sam or Joe, then we'll be able to get along. But as John said, it's very clear that God has put the stars in the sky for signs and seasons. Now, seasons doesn't mean winter, spring, autumn, etc. It, in this sense, simply means appointed times. And I believe the very important star of Christmas is part of this, as studied by the Eastern astrologers, but it's only part of a much bigger program that God's got written in the stars. When you think about it, the written word of God only became available around about 1500 BC with Moses. So what was God's way of getting his message across to everybody before that? And I think the stars and the signs in them is a fair key. And that perhaps explains even some mysteries, like how did the ancient Chinese, for example, have the story of a coming nobleman or a coming Messiah, a coming Saviour to fix up the problems of the fallen nobleman. That's another whole story we won't go to, but perhaps it answers some of those sorts of questions. Okay, so there's our Genesis 1, which John referred to. I won't labour on that one. But the heavens declare the glory of God, Psalm 19. It's not just declaring that he made them, but they also declare the glory of God in his Messiah, Jesus. He determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. And names given by God always have specific and important meanings. And that's also repeated in Isaiah 40. Lift your eyes and look to the heavens, who created all of these. He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name. Few constellations, when you look at them, have any defining shapes except maybe the Southern Cross. The meanings were assigned to them, they were given to them, and even secular sources acknowledge the link between the Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Hindu, Hebrew, Islamic understandings of the zodiac. They all have the same meanings to the star names. So they've all come out of the one source. I believe the zodiac it just became a corruption of God's good signs in the heavens, of his eternal plan, probably one of the major occultic corruptions at the Tower of Babel by Nimrod. We're actually warned not to, try and do what John's mum was doing, and many people do, is go to the papers and try and get our direction from the stars. So there's Isaiah 47. Let your astrologers come forward, those stargazers who make predictions month by month. Let them save you, for want is coming upon you. This is very mocking, obviously. Surely they are like stubble. The fire will burn them up. The zodiac is in a number of cultures, as I mentioned, and in Egypt, I think Joe mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, there's the zodiac in the temple at Dendera in Egypt. There's a picture of that one, but it's also in the temple of Esne, and I found this quite interesting because the way the zodiac works is the sun passes through each of the star signs. It's called the precession of the equinox, and it's the passage of the sun through the various constellations. But where does it start? And there's various ideas of which is the first constellation, which is the first of the signs of the zodiac, of where it starts. But perhaps this ancient temple in Esne gives us the clue. And you've got a sphinx between, just put that there, the sphinx is there, and you've got Virgo on the right, and Leo there on the left. And the Sphinx is a word that means to bind together. And the tail of the Sphinx is the ending, and the head of the Sphinx is that originally of a woman, and that's the beginning. So it indicates that the beginning of the zodiac precession of the equinox is in fact Virgo. Now, in the Hebrew zodiac, it's called the Mazzaroth, and it's actually mentioned in Job 38. So the Hebrew zodiac and the knowledge of that is ancient as well, Job being the oldest written book in the Bible. Job 38 says this: can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season, that's the zodiac, or can you guide the great bear with its cub? So Mazzaroth being the zodiac, and I find it interesting there again it says in its season. So given what we're saying about the meaning of season in Genesis, it is the appointed times. You're bringing out the zodiac in its appointed times. So there are signs and symbols, it seems to be saying in this passage, in the Hebrew zodiac, in the zodiac that God's given us. So we won't have time, obviously, to look at all of them, but I thought let's at least have a quick look at Virgo, which in Hebrew is Betula, and it does mean actually virgin in Hebrew as well. And each sign or each constellation in the zodiac, I'll say zodiac because it's the one that most people understand, has 3 additional constellations called decans. And the decans for Virgo are Coma, Boots, and Centaurus. Just before I get onto those, I want to mention the names of some of the stars. There's many named stars in Virgo, but here's 3 key ones. The name of the star in her left hand is Spica, which means seed. And in Hebrew, the name of that star is Zerah, and it means seed. And so obviously we can draw a connection with the seed of the woman, which I think Diane's going to speak more of a little bit later. Seed of the woman, Genesis 3:15, will come forth. That's speaking of the Messiah. The star in the right hand is called Subulon, which means branch. And in Isaiah 11, we have a passage that says, there shall come forth a rod from Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might. And goes on to talk about him being a judge as well. So here we have the virgin has a seed, there's a seed of the virgin, who will be a branch, a righteous branch is spoken of in Isaiah. And the star in her head is called Zavijava, and that means gloriously beautiful. So it's really interesting in Isaiah chapter 4, verse 2, it says, the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious. So it really seems to me that Isaiah might be even referring to these signs, or at least linking what he's saying to these signs in the heavens. Now, just to go on to some of these decans, just very briefly, Coma, the one on the top there, means the desired son. So here we have, the virgin who got the seed of the virgin, who will be the righteous branch and is gloriously beautiful, and then a decan that says there will be a desired son. Boots means the coming shepherd. And you can see there he's even got a shepherd's crook and so on in that picture. Centaurus, we often look at this and think, well, that's very, very weird. It's a man with a horse's body. It actually means despised. And the horse body with the man's head represents the dual nature of God and man. And just one star in that particular constellation is in the hoof, and it's called Taliman, and it means the heretofore and hereafter, i.e. the one who was and is and is to come. So those who are familiar with some of the scriptural references of the Messiah will see the linkage there. Now, beneath Centaurus, which I don't have there, but the Southern Cross comes in, which we know as the Southern Cross. It wasn't always known as the Southern Cross. In Hebrew, it's called Adom, which means to cut off. And it was last visible in the Northern Hemisphere around about the time of the crucifixion. Really interesting. Now, the interesting thing about the Southern Cross is that it has a star at each point of injury at the crucifixion. So one in each hand, the thorns in the crown at the top, and the nails in the nail in the feet at the bottom, and of course the sword in the side there. Now, I find this incredible as someone that sees the Southern Cross all the time down here in Australia. It was recognised by a European explorer when he went around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa and saw the Southern Cross and had known it from the early star charts, but had never seen it, and many Europeans hadn't for a long time. And just one last little thing, the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet is Tau, and it was originally written as a cross. And this seems to point to the whole "it is finished." So last letter in the alphabet, a cross, and "it is finished." And I just love that connection. But there's so many more things we could talk about. The various decans and constellations in the zodiac all have meaning, right through to Leo, or the line of Judah, which is the second coming of the Messiah ultimately. Okay, so that's really a summary that I've got. If you're interested in studying that up more, Bullinger's a great place to start. Dennis Pedersen is a really good summary as well. So just